Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we are doing the weekend review show for June 28th through the 30th, 2019. We have a couple of new wide release openers for you. We have Annabelle Comes Home, which I believe is, the third Annabelle movie? We'll go a deeper dive into that whole thing, that whole Conjuring cinematic universe. And then we also had Yesterday, which is a film from Danny Boyle that got released this weekend as well. Both went wide. So we will walk through the top 10 with deeper dives on those new wide releases. We'll talk a little bit about some stuff that's hanging on outside of the top 10, and then we will walk through what's going to happen here for the 4th of July holiday here in the States. Also Canada Day tomorrow in Canada. Don't want to leave them out. So let's do this top 10 and see what happened this weekend. So number one this weekend, it was the second weekend for Toy Story 4. Weekend gross right now. Again, Sunday is always an estimate, but it's usually very accurate. For the weekend, Toy Story 4 did $57.9 million here in its second weekend, a 52% drop, which is okay. It's not great because, for a children's film, usually drops, especially when you're talking the third, fourth, fifth weekend, are in the 40s if they're doing well. There's something about children's films that they just do better and have longer legs than the average film. The opposite would be like a horror movie, which has really short legs and drops off significantly in its second, third weekend. But children's films usually stick around for a while. 52% on the surface doesn't look amazing, but because the opening weekend was so big, but it wasn't necessarily even close to what we thought it was going to be. So it's kind of a mixed story here. Deadline's saying it's okay. I don't think it's as good as they're sort of painting that picture right now, because 52% on a second weekend with an already depressed opening weekend that wasn't close to tracking or industry projections is not great for an animation film, especially something like Toy Story 4. So it's doing okay. Look, it's going to make a lot of money. It's essentially a hit. I'm not trying to say it's not a hit. Just the expectation and the thought process and the projection and tracking for this was a lot higher than what it's doing right now. So I would say it's a little bit of disappointment for Disney. I think they thought this was going to really pop off and do easily $400 million domestically. Maybe they thought it was going to do $500 million domestically, because it does have that cachet as a brand that's been going on for well over 20 years. Right now, worldwide, it's at 360, which is pretty good. Domestic take so far is 65%. So what that tells me is there's a lot of foreign markets this needs to open on. I'm assuming it's going to open everywhere in the world. I wouldn't think this is sort of a niche, sort of regional product. Like, this is a global release. So I'm assuming that lifetime gross worldwide is going to be more like a 40-60 domestic to foreign. So it really needs to make up a lot in that foreign market or get released in a lot of places still. So there's a lot more story to be told here in Toy Story 4. I don't like that drop. I don't think it's fantastic. I would look for something in the high 40s, 48, 47, I think would be really good, and would tell a very different story than what we heard on opening weekend, which was, hey, this did really well, but not even really close to what we were thinking. My thought was that the second weekend drop would be fantastic. It's not. So it's kind of, I think a mixed message here from Toy Story 4 overall. And we'll see, when does Lion King come out? Like 3 weeks? God, this summer is blowing by. Lion King comes out. I'm assuming that it's going to, cut the knees off of this thing, Toy Story 4, and it's really going to sort of start to deflate a little bit here domestically, at least in the US and Canada. But where's it going to end up? I don't know. It looks like a 380 to 420 domestic run, which, how can you really argue with that? Like, as much as I want to say, hey, it's an underperformance, a disappointment, all that kind of stuff, but like, it's going to make money. I just think that it's maybe not the grand slam that Disney wanted, and it's more like a double or a triple. So it's not that far off of what they wanted, but it's certainly not what they envisioned. And I think not what a lot of the people in the industry thought this thing was going to do. And I think the difference there is that, like, growing up with Toy Story, as someone who's been following the box office for, well over 20 years now, Toy Story was always this phenomenon. And like, if a Toy Story movie is coming out, then like, it's going to do fantastic, and it's going to break all the records and all that sort of stuff. That was the assumption going into Toy Story 4. And it's like, it just didn't do that amazing level of performance that we were thinking. So it just feels kind of weird. It's going to be profitable. It's going to be a win, but it just feels weird to me. The last movie came out 9 years ago. And there was an 11-year gap between the second and the third. So maybe they'll wait another 10 years. I did not know it had been 9 years since the third one. The third one felt like it came out yesterday. I don't know. 2009 feels really recent to me for some reason. But yeah, so is it going to beat Toy Story 4? So Toy Story 4 did 415 domestic. And that's 10 years ago, so you got to change that a bit with interest. I think it probably hits that amount. Maybe. So if you look at it on that way, it's really not a disappointment at all. And so I know mixed messages all abound here, but I think what happened here is two things. One, we thought it was Toy Story, so it's going to break every record that's out there, and that's not true anymore because of comic book movies. And because of comic book movies, we have this weird sort of skewed perspective of success at the box office, and I think that's why there's this weird mixed message thing going on with Toy Story 4. At the end of the day, it's a huge win. That's what it is. So number 2 this weekend was Annabelle Comes Home. This is the third Annabelle movie. I can't even freaking keep. I mean, I love this cinematic universe. It's all from The Conjuring, folks. The Conjuring came out in 2013, which was not that long ago, 6 years ago. I think it came out in the summer too. It is really. I wrote a whole long. If you follow the Twitter, there's a Medium post. You go there. I wrote a whole long article about the state of horror movies from last year, including a lot of stuff about Conjuring and Annabelle, and what is sort of how it's different than what was going on in the early 2000s and the 90s and stuff like that. But it's really cool to see a single film, The Conjuring, that was really, at the end of the day, just a superb genre flick. And what I mean by that is it wasn't necessarily trying to create something brand new. It was a haunted house movie. But they did it so well that it's really elevated it to another level of quality. And that level of quality sort of echoed out in this whole series of films that we've had over the last 6 years. And there's a lot. I mean, you got the Annabelle movies, you had The Nun. I guess The Nun is part of the Conjuring offset and not the Annabelle. So Annabelle's a whole separate series of movies. And then you had La Llorona, which came out this spring that did pretty well, which was like marketed as part of the Conjuring series, but was it really? I don't know. But anyway, so this is the third Annabelle movie. The original movie came out in October 2014. I remember it very well. It was sort of my last hurrah in New York there for a while, the last probably 3 or 4 months. And I went to go see it out in Long Island with a friend, and it was a really fun experience. I was super stoked for it. I enjoyed The Conjuring. I enjoyed Annabelle. I thought it was like not a great movie. The last half hour is trash, but the opening hour I thought was pretty good. Apparently that's not the case though. We'll talk about the Letterboxd score in a bit, but like people do not like Annabelle. Horror movie fans, I just don't get why. They just don't like it. They despise the movie. But that did 37. Really great opening for that movie. Closed out at 84 that fall in 2014, 5 years ago now. Then 2 years ago, we had an Annabelle Creation, which got dumped in this weird, like the worst August in like 30 years. With August 2017, a really big summer movie slump there. For like 6 weeks, it was a disaster. But Annabelle was one of the silver linings there. Opened up at 35, kind of matched that Annabelle opening, but closed it at 102 because it was a much better movie. People really liked that. That was like a toss-back, throwback movie. I want to say to like the 30s. I might be making that up, but it was around that time period where the movie took place. And also Annabelle was also a period piece, I guess, too. It took place in the 60s, late 60s. Okay, so with these two Annabelle movies, now 2 years later, we get the third one. I'm going to be honest, I don't even know if I've seen the trailer to this movie, and I'm a huge horror fan. This one just kind of came out of the blue for me. And it's doing okay. So it opened up on Wednesday. So it has a 5-day opening now. Right now it sits at, for its total, $31 million. This 3-day gross, Monday, Saturday, Sunday, is looking at about $20 million for Annabelle Comes Home. And so let's do our deeper dive on this and just see what happened and what's going on. Let's talk about the quality first. Rotten Tomato critic score right now is 70%, fresh score. Actual score 60 out of 100. Not terrible for a horror movie, but not great, obviously. But like often with horror stuff, you'll see them like the 40% fresh rating and like lower than that, even on the actual score. So it's actually not that bad. Verified audience score, which I love now from Rotten Tomatoes, really turned a new leaf for me. 72% there, verified audience score. And we are noticing a connection between verified audience score, which is ticket buyers that actually rate the film on Fandango, versus cinema score and post track, which are in-person surveys. So now we have a really good data set to figure out what audiences are actually thinking about this film. So verified audience score for Annabelle Comes Home, 72%, actual score 78 out of 100, which is okay. It's not great. It's not in the 80s. It's not in the 90s like a lot of other films have been, but it's okay. And then, again, it's horror films. People are a little bit more critical of horror films. All audience score, this is people... including, I think it includes verified audience, but everybody who claims that they saw it, but there's no proof. 71% score, 76 out of 100. Again, not a lot of variation between verified audience score, but I think we're going to see a bigger separation between these two with like the new Star Wars movie and stuff like that. Cinema score of a B-, that seems low, but it's a horror movie, so there's a little bit of a sort of downgrade there usually. Post-track was 50%. So now I'm like going back on what I said. Post-track 50% is really low. That's 2.5 stars out of 5. I don't know why that is. It seems a little bit off from the cinema score and verified audience score. So I'm not sure if that's just like a weird anomaly. We'll see. 40% definite recommend, which is very low. Okay, so Letterboxd score, Film Nerds, Film Twitter, 2.9 stars or 58 out of 100. That's not... It's bad, but it's not terrible. Anything in the 2 stars on Letterboxd is pretty bad. Anything in 3 stars is pretty good. Anything up like high 3s or 4 is super, super good. Original Annabelle got a 44, which is terrible. Annabelle Creation got a 60, which is actually pretty good on Letterboxd. The new Child's Play movie also got a 60. Kind of gives you an idea. That seems high. See, that's interesting because Child's Play, from everything I've heard anecdotally and from critics, this movie's trash. It's terrible. But the Film Twitter, Film Nerds on Letterboxd kind of liked it a bit. So that's kind of cool. A little bit different audience. Just to compare all this stuff to like a high mark, Hereditary the last couple of years is like a big A24 art horror film, elevated horror film. I don't know when that term came into being. I don't remember it coming into being, but all I've seen is think pieces about the term elevated horror. I don't know how that makes any sense. I'm going to do a little bit like elevated horror. What is that really? I get what they're saying. It's like The Witch, It Follows, Hereditary, It Comes at Night, that sort of stuff where it is a horror movie, but it's not like a schlocky, stabby slasher horror movie or a jump scare conjuring horror movie. It's sort of like, it's more arty. So I guess I get what they're getting at with elevated horror, and Hereditary certainly falls into that concept, and so does his new movie, Midsummer, which comes out in, a week or so. That movie's going to be nuts. It comes out on Wednesday. I got to go see it. So I don't really get the elevated horror. Like Annabelle Comes Home, it is kind of funny though, because Annabelle Comes Home is not at all elevated horror. It's just not. It's not, and I prefer the term art horror. Just because Mandy would be also another good example of this, because that's not really elevated per se, but it is definitely arty. And so there is a distinction here. You know, it's almost a distinction between like a genre film and kind of an art film. And those two things are very different. An art film is a little bit, can be a little bit more experimental, can be really a lot more experimental than a genre flick. But a genre flick usually plays it pretty sort of safe in terms of what it's doing with the story, the editing, audience expectations. It's pretty much like not going to make you that uncomfortable. But something like Hereditary makes you super uncomfortable, and that's kind of the point. And that's what makes it sort of a little more raw. Would be another good example of a movie that I would call art horror. And so Annabelle Comes Home, definitely not that. Definitely more in the genre. All the Annabelle and Conjuring movies are genre picks. And so Hereditary 3.978 on Letterboxd. Would never be able to hit that. There's no way, because that's art film is sort of, 3.5 and higher is art film essentially on Letterboxd. Happy Death Day to You, which I think is kind of somewhat similar in this vein, a sequel of a sort of genre schlocky horror film, 3.162 on Letterboxd. So it's kind of in that range, better than Annabelle. A little bit worse than Annabelle Creation right now, a little bit worse than Happy Death Day to You and Child's Play. So it's kind of, it's in the middle of the road situation in terms of audience quality. Now, the thing with a horror film, it sits at, what is it sitting at now? $31.2 million for the 5-day, but $20 million for the 3-day. Where's it going to go overall? Because it had that midweek opening, I think that helps a bit because it had a wide open marketplace to some degree. But multiple of what? It's going to hit a 2x multiple here pretty quickly. And it's got this holiday week coming up. I mean, it's not even like a weekend. It's like July 4th is on the Thursday. Then you got Friday. Most people have Friday off. Most people are probably taking the whole week off. So it's kind of like a whole holiday week. I think this multiplier is going to be pretty good on this. Like, I don't see, it's not going to stop at 40. It probably won't even stop at a 50. I think it's going to just cruise into the 60, maybe $70 million range, which is a really big number for a movie like this. And that's the thing about the Annabelle movies is that, like, they're not shot for much. The tight budget. This one was a little bit higher, $27 to $32 million for the production budget before marketing. So it's definitely on the higher range. It did come in a little bit below expectations. They were expecting 30 to 35 for the 5-day, but overall, these horror films always make money. Every movie that I listed, Annabelle Creation, Child's Play, Hereditary, Happy Death Day, those all, well, Happy Death Day might be the exception, but it was only shot for $5 million or something like that. They all make money, right? And that's why they keep pumping them out, and why we're in sort of this golden age of horror is that a movie like Hereditary has no right making $40 million at the box office domestically, but it did. Midsummer, I think Midsummer is going to make a ton of money. I think the cinema score is going to be an F. Let's tell you that right now. If I call that right, I'm going to be very proud of myself. But I am calling that Midsummer will have a cinema score of F. We'll talk about more about that later. But Annabelle Creation, the numbers are a lot different, and the economics are so different for horror films than, say, Toy Story 4. Because with a horror film, I can shoot it for $30 million. It can go worldwide and make $100 million, and I'm still going to make a pretty big profit. They just keep the cost super low, and the marketing is a little bit lower than your average film. Who went to go see Annabelle Comes Home? Let's talk about that really quick. Under 25s dominated versus over 25s, 58% to 42. That's a huge over-index on under 25s. So the young people really did drive this performance here. And the fact that the older people didn't show up is maybe a reason why I didn't hit that $35 million projection. Men and women are evenly split. That's a little bit surprising because men over-index in general at 53% usually. So this actually was a little bit more skewed towards a women audience versus the average movie-going audience. So that's kind of interesting there that they would show up a little bit more than the expectation. This I find really fascinating. So the ethnic or racial breakdown here of the audience, and this is usually they take this on Friday night, so it may be a little bit skewed. 39% white folk. That's very under normal. So 53% is your average percentage of white people in a movie-going audience. This is only 39%. Latinos were way over-indexed. They are usually at 23%. They're at 31%. African Americans also over-indexed at 18% versus normally like a 12, 13%. So I find that honest. It's playing better with minority populations, which is kind of like not that surprising with horror films. But this one specifically, just for some reason, it's connecting with those audiences. We'll see how this whole thing plays out and how it does. But I think it's, where does this stand on sort of my baseball metaphor of like, is this a win? Is this a loss? This kind of feels like a single double, kind of just what Warner Brothers expected here in terms of this performance. I think they're going to be happy with it. I think they're really going to love to see what happens over this week because I just think it's going to start. It's going to have this it's going to have abnormally long legs for a horror film. The Purge did this, I think, last year, Purge Election, or maybe it was 2 years ago, where it opened kind of like depressed, but because of the holiday situation, it just kept making money in like the second, third weekend. And I think that's what's going to happen here when Annabelle Comes Home. So I think it's a win, but we'll have to see how it plays out over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so that was number 2 at the box office weekend. Annabelle Comes Home. Number 3 is kind of an anomaly here. Yesterday, from Universal. This is a Danny Boyle film. The premise here is that a young man, I think he's like a singer, performer, whatever, songwriter, who loves the Beatles. Something happens, the power goes out, he wakes up the next day, and nobody remembers who the Beatles are or any of their songs. He's the only one who remembers. And I think he goes on to sort of like world stardom, like sharing Beatles music, all this sort of stuff. And I think it's a love story as well. This one is just, it was a bizarre premise. It had I don't want to say a significant amount of buzz, but a little bit of buzz about it. With Danny Boyle being attached, I just read this whole list of Danny Boyle films that a friend, Chris, who might be on the show here next week, sent over to me. And it was a really fascinating list because you just realize that Danny Boyle has had this really long, really interesting career with just these massive peaks like Train Spotting and 28 Days Later. And then these valleys like The Beach, or what a lot of people are saying is this movie is kind of one of his valleys. They're saying it's one of his worst movies ever made. But it doesn't matter because listen to this, folks. Like, people are loving this movie. Before I get into those numbers, $17 million right now for the 3-day. The word of mouth on this is going to be pretty freaking strong. Per theater average, by the way, was 6,500. It was on 1,000 less screens than Annabelle Comes Home. So it had 6,500 per theater average versus Annabelle Comes Home 5,600. Really strong sign this thing's going to do well. Budget was only $26 million. So what did critics think about this? And I'm probably going to be in the critics camp because I love Danny Boyle, but I'm also very critical of his work because he's done such amazing stuff. Rotten Tomatoes score 60% from critics, so that is fresh, but on the border right there by a single percentage point. 64 out of 100 actual score, not very good. Listen to this though. Verified audience score 91%, an 88 out of 100 score from people who have bought tickets to see this and rated it afterwards. That's super high. Audience score is very similar, 88%, 86 out of 100. Cinema score A-, that tracks, right? Post-track, 90% on post-track. That's an in-person survey. 65% definitely recommend. So what we're seeing here is critics are lukewarm on it. I would probably be lukewarm on it too, just because it seems very schlocky. Audiences absolutely love it to a level that I thought was possible. I think it's maybe the Beatles connection. I don't know. Danny Boyle, remember, this is the same Danny Boyle did Slumdog Millionaire, right? So he has the ability to make these very, I would call them populist sort of romance films, which is so weird. It's the same guy who made Train Spotting and 28 Days Later is making this sort of stuff. But this is going to be, I get the feeling right now. And I had this feeling a couple weeks back when the marketing was really taking off on Yesterday. I could tell that they were doing something special with it. Universal has been distributed by Universal, so a big studio. They felt that there was something there. Obviously you have the Beatles music behind it, so that's, for boomers and Gen X people and everybody, I guess, but those groups specifically, it's a big deal to have this music in the movie. And there's something just clicked and something felt special about it. I don't mean the quality, I mean the marketing behind it, the branding that they were doing. It felt like they had handled it. It felt like they knew exactly what they were going for. And there's this spot that I saw on TV last weekend. I think I talked about this on the last week on the podcast, but like just briefly, like it was a commercial, but it was just someone interviewing people, talking about Beatles music, and then talking about this movie. And I was like, this is bizarre, but this is so going to work because no one has any idea. The name Yesterday, it's whatever. It's a song, right? Everybody knows the song. But just the word, they're like, I don't really get it. And then you have like the trailer. It's like, oh, this looks interesting. It's kind of confusing. The premise is just weird for, I think, the majority of just normal audience members. I'm like, they're going to like check out the moment you say like, everybody forgot the Beatles songs. And they're like, what? But that sort of marketing where you're basically like, hey, this is a movie about the Beatles music, that's going to work. And that's going to get people to show up and be like, oh yeah, I'll check this out. I love the Beatles. Despite this crazy premise. I would love to see, I would love to be in the pitch meeting for this where Danny Boyle's like, yeah, so like this kid forgets all the Beatles music and then he's the only one who remembers and he goes on to like, re-record all their music. I mean, it just sounds like the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard in your life. But I think it might work because the final product of the film is connecting with people so well. That post-track score of a 90 is like matches directly with that verified audience score. Like that's going to be a 3x, maybe even 4x multiplier here. So, it's to open at 17. It's not like it's going to be like a $100 million opener or anything like that. But like 17. With the holidays and this word of mouth, like, And keep in mind around holidays, we have longer multipliers in general just because people are off. That's a kind of a golden rule. July 4th is a little bit different depending on where it falls, right? So It's at 17 now. Basement right now is 51.50. 3x multiplier. I can't see it going below that. I might even think that like at a 4x, let's see what that does. That's what 68. Like I'm calling it. I'm saying 70 million for this. I think it's going to play really well. It's going to break a 4x multiplier. It just has that sort of like vibe to it. Letterboxd score was a 64 out of 100, which is okay, not fantastic compared to like Star is Born, which was a 76 out of 100, which is rarely high. Just throwing these musical romance films out there. La La Land was 80. That's kind of like the high point probably on Letterboxd for a movie like this. Crazy Rich Asians romance film from last summer had a magical run in August. Was that last year? I think it was. 70 out of 100. Isn't It Romantic? Earlier rom-com from this year wasn't very good. 54 out of 100. 500 Days of Summer, because I always love to talk about that movie. 72 out of 100. So it's a little bit lower than 500 Days right now. A little bit lower than Crazy Rich Asians. Star is Born. So I think that film Twitter nerd crowd maybe not be. They're kind of more in line with the critics, I would say. In fact, they gave the same exact score. Not that they're 1-to-1, but in the 60s out of 100. So this was good. It's going to be one of those movies that just divides people, like the Aladdin. Critics hated it, but people love it. The masses love it. I shouldn't say the masses. The general audience loves it. And I think that's going to be the same for Yesterday. Who went to go see this? 78% over 25. So obviously old folks. Not a ton of under 25s, only 22%. Women over 25 were at 41%. And they loved the movie, giving it a 92%. I think that's post-track. Pulling these numbers. So if you're ever interested where I pull these numbers, it's all on Deadline. Deadline does these write-ups every weekend, so check that out if you want these numbers as well. So women over 25 was the biggest quad there. Men over 25 was at 37, so not that much lower. Females under 25 were 13% of the audience. Males under 25 only at 9%. In terms of the racial breakdown here, 65% of the audience was white. That's way over index normal. 18% Latino, a little bit under, 7% Asian, kind of normal, 6% African American, which is pretty like half of what they usually are of an audience. So I think this is going to be kind of a big run here for Yesterday. I didn't expect that would happen. I kind of thought the premise was so absurd, but then when I saw that marketing last week, and I was like, oh, they get it. They get that the premise is absurd, and they're going to find a way to really sell this to people. And it just goes to show you that, like, and we'll talk about maybe Late Night here in a bit and why it's doing so terrible. But it's just sort of an example of, and I brought that up last time too. It's like, if you have a good, interesting movie, that's fine. That's the first step. All right, you got a great product. That's awesome. When people actually experience it, that will really show. But you got to get them in the door. You got to get them in the door. You got to get them aware. You got to get them engaged, and you got to get them to make an action to go out and go see it. And with Universal, what they did with Yesterday worked. It was kind of a weird ass movie, super odd premise, but they found a way to sell it to people. Now the Beatles obviously helps, right? You got to wonder why they couldn't do that for Booksmart or Late Night. But we'll get to that in a bit. Okay, so number 4 was, that's Yesterday, a 17 million. Gonna have a great run here over the holiday. Number 4 was Aladdin. I can't even look. I don't have words. 9.3 million this weekend, a 29% drop in its 6th weekend. This movie just will not stop making money, and we saw this with like Beauty and the Beast too. So it's like one of those films where, no matter where it opens, it's just, there's something about it that people, maybe it's nostalgia, maybe there's like this Disney cult worship thing going on. I don't know. People just keep showing up. And if you're dropping 29% on your 6th weekend, that's repeat viewers. That's not new people showing up as much. That's not somebody rushing out to see this new movie. It's like, oh no, I want to see this again. And so, man, Guy Ritchie has really, really turned around his career here in like a year or so. Worldwide, Aladdin sits at 830. This is the biggest winner of the summer so far. Just a phenomenal performance for that movie, and one that critics absolutely hated, but the general audience just loves it. They're eating it up. So that was number 4. Number 5 was Secret Life of Pets 2. 7 million, 31% drop. Also a great drop. That one sits at 131 now. We talked about this one a lot. This one's essentially, seems like the end of the series. 223 worldwide right now. What did the original one do? didn't do like $2 billion worldwide or something. No, it did, didn't it? I just got to double check these numbers. Oh no, I don't know why I thought it did $2 billion. It did $875 million worldwide, but it did do 368 domestic, which I still can't wrap my head around. And I don't think anybody else can, because this is why it's doing so bad. The sequel, it's not a very good movie. People don't like it. I don't expect it to go anywhere, but that is a good drop. So it's kind of settling in here. It's fourth weekend. If it can keep having those 31%, sub 40 drops, it's going to make some money out here on the back end of its run. But I think overall with that movie, it's not going to make up for its disappointing performance. And I think that, it's $600 million off the original now worldwide. So it's not going to make that much up. So I don't think we're going to see a third one anytime soon from Universal. Number 6 with Men in Black International, $6.5 million on the weekend, 38% drop. A lot of great drops this weekend. I wonder why. Maybe a lot of people are taking off. Maybe everybody's on holiday. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's Canada, because it is Canada Day tomorrow. 3,600 theaters here, $1,700 per theater average. That's at 110. Oh, sorry, 110 was the budget. So it's at $65 million so far domestic, worldwide 219. This was a huge disaster. It's a massive flop. I think it's a huge misread by Sony in the marketplace and what people want now and consumer demand. Nobody wanted another Men in Black movie like this, and if they did, it would have to be completely redone with a totally different take. They didn't do that, so that's the result here. 7 was Avengers Endgame. I should know more about this, but I think that there was an extended cut put out this weekend because it added 1,000 theaters kind of out of nowhere. So I think that's what's happening. What I think they're doing here is they added like extra scenes or something, and to get all the MCU people like hyped up to go see it, so that it can break the Avatar record, which I think might happen. I always thought it was going to break the Avatar record, but it kind of petered out there in the last month or so, and that didn't happen. So that's sort of a little re-release here so I can break that record. I think it's going to happen. It looks like it will. Hopefully it will. I mean, I think maybe it deserves it. Like, it's such a big, massive movie. 10 years after Avatar came out, like, something needs to dethrone it. Okay, number 8 was Child's Play, 4.2 million, 70% drop. Yikes. 70% drop, didn't lose a single theater, folks. But what's happening there is probably theater owners are turning, like, it didn't lose any theaters, but that doesn't mean it didn't lose any screens or showtimes. So they probably shifted those around a lot. So Child's Play, $1,400 per theater weekend and second weekend. Total take so far, $23 million. Wow. So this is what happens with a horror movie that just doesn't connect with people, or people don't like it all that much. I think it's like audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, verified audience score is like in the 60s. So this thing's going nowhere. Again, it's United Artists releasing. I don't know what they're thinking. They failed Booksmart. They failed, I think, Late Night too. So they need to wrap their head around releasing how to do a little bit better. But I don't know. Maybe the movie just wasn't very good. A 70% drop on a second weekend, that's bad. Even for a horror film, that's bad. So I don't think it's going to make a lot more money at all. Does this thing have an international audience is the real question that I have. Because if it doesn't, it could be in trouble of losing cash. I don't see anything international so far, so maybe they haven't pushed it out worldwide yet. So my read on that right now is like that drop is really, it's terrible enough to sort of change my view in the film. It only cost $10 million to make. Marketing, who knows, $30 million, $20 million. But they only get half of the receipts, so they're sitting at what, $11.5-ish million in revenue for this. That's not going to make up marketing costs, so they better push it out worldwide to make some more money on this. It's probably more like a push, to be honest with you, once you get VOD and stuff involved. So not a great performance, terrible second weekend drop. It's not going anywhere. Okay, number 9, 3.8 million for Rocket Man, 31% drop, good drop. Losing theaters, lost 400 theaters, per theater average 1,900 in its fifth weekend. Total so far, $84 million domestically. What are you sitting on worldwide? 165. This one is just not playing worldwide the way I thought it would. I know Elton John's such like an icon of music, especially like in the UK. You'd think this thing would just be amazing, and I don't know, Australia and all the countries like that. I don't know what happened here. It It's certainly performing well. $40 million production budget. You can't complain if it's done 165 worldwide. It's going to make some money. It's just, I think we got spoiled with Bohemian Rhapsody's bizarro performance that still doesn't make any sense. And I think we were sort of led in that direction with Rocket Man, and it's not going to do that. It's not going to come anywhere close to that. So that was number 6. Number 10 was John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, 3.1 million, 22% drop. Still in 1,500 theaters in its 7th weekend. This thing is just cruising right now, cruising to a really good performance this year. 161 million domestic, worldwide 303. We're going to see another one. Like, this is the best performing movie in the series. Keanu Reeves is now this incredibly beloved actor worldwide. Nerds love him. Everybody loves him. He's doing the new Cyberpunk game from the people who did Witcher 3. That's going to maybe be the biggest video game ever made or something. Maybe the most expensive. It's still going to make like billions of dollars in revenue. Literally billions, probably. So, so that John Wick 3 is just doing fantastic. We will see another one there. So that is the top 10. Let's take a look and see what's going on outside the top 10. Let's take a look first at like what's dropping a lot of theaters. Shaft dropped 2,000 theaters. Awful. Its percentage drop over the weekend was 60% in its 3rd weekend. It has only made $18 million. How is that even remotely possible? Shaft, it only makes $18 million. That blows my mind. Late Night lost 1,300 theaters. That sits at $13 million, which actually looks fantastic versus Shaft. Godzilla King of Monsters lost 1,000 theaters. That sits at 106 domestically. Dark Phoenix lost 900 theaters. Sits at 63 domestically. Men in Black 2 lost about 560 theaters in its 3rd weekend. These are all flops. Anything that's losing that big amount in its first 4 weekends, it's flopping usually. So let's talk about these maybe very quickly one by one. Shaft is a complete disaster. I don't get why it's doing so poorly. I don't think they marketed it well to the general audience here in the US and Canada. It just didn't connect with people. What's also weird about Shaft 2 is that it is on Netflix now, I think internationally. So anywhere outside US, Canada, you can watch Shaft on Netflix right now. How does that make remote sense to anybody? What is Warner Brothers doing? Maybe they thought like, okay, like this movie's going to suck and it's not going to play well. So let's just make money selling it to Netflix right away. Because that's a weird sort of like, you can say what you want about, let's walk through the basics here. So releasing strategies in windows. So right now in the United States and sort of the industry, a movie comes out, 90 days later, it will premiere on VOD. That's essentially set in stone as the rule has been for the last decade. They don't put it on VOD, and that's for rental and buying only. So transactional, they call it that transaction, not streaming. So you watch it, you can rent it for a couple of days, you can buy it on digital, electric sell-through. That's a 90-day window. Then it'll hit streaming, SVODs, subscription video on demand services, like a Netflix, like an HBO Now. It'll hit that about 7 to 8 to 9 months after its release date in theaters. These sort of windows, obviously the industry is in complete upheaval. There's a revolution going on some level with streaming over the old forms of broadcast TV, cable TV, and theatrical exhibition. So there's a lot changing, but that has not changed that much. But what we have seen recently, and I don't know if this is the second Samuel L. Jackson movie that's done this, because Hitman's Bodyguard did the same thing. Released a couple Augusts ago, was domestic here, didn't do all that hot, but was on Netflix, I think worldwide, or at least in Russia or something. I think maybe they do it in Russia because it's Netflix in Russia. I assume they are. I think they do it in some of those countries because they know it's going to get pirated in anyway. So they just put it on Netflix, say, fuck it. But it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me just because the moment that movie came out, Shaft, I could go online to one of 1 million different streaming websites. Kodi is something that a lot of people use too. Anything like that. And if you have moderate level of intelligence, you can find these things. You're probably not going to get sued by your cable company because it's just streaming all over the place. They're not going to sue everybody. So I could watch an HD copy of Shaft probably the night it came out in the comfort of my home. How does that make any sense? And the reason that happened is because you released it on Netflix worldwide versus the domestic movie release. That doesn't really work for me, and I don't get that strategy. And maybe a lot of people, maybe this is always sort of the argument with box office nerds. Oh, it's piracy is why it's doing so bad. That's always sort of ridiculed. But at this point, if you're releasing an HD copy of the movie that I can find on a million different websites the night it gets released in theaters, yeah, piracy is definitely taking a toll on the box office here. I just don't get why you would do that. It doesn't make any sense. Just wait a month, wait 2 months before it goes on Netflix worldwide. Why would you do it the same like weekend? It's just bizarre. Okay, anyway, Shaft's a massive flop. It's going to lose a ton of money. Although like maybe like 100 million, but a lot of money. Late Night is a huge flop, even by its sort of small standard. And we talked about this one a ton. Obviously, I told you this thing was going to sort of tailspin out, and that's what's happening. It's losing 1,300 theaters in its fourth weekend. It's only made $13 million total. They bought it for $13 million. Now, keep in mind, we're looking at revenue here. Amazon, whoever's involved here, is only going to make $7 million off of this in revenue. They've already spent 13 plus 30, I want to say $35 million in marketing. They're going to lose money on this. How do you lose money on a movie like Late Night? It makes no sense. Again, back to the yesterday sort of marketing discussion, you got to market this stuff better. You got to get it out there in a different way. You got to create hype. You got to create spectacle. That's the only way you're going to get people to show up in the movie theater. Same thing can be said for Godzilla and Dark Phoenix. I think Godzilla, people weren't really asking for it. They made it. The people didn't show up. Dark Phoenix, nobody was asking for it. They made it anyways, and people also didn't show up. Biggest bomb of these four is probably, in terms of money lost, will probably be Dark Phoenix. Just because they poured the normal sort of comic book movie money into it, and it's just been an absolute debacle. Men in Black 2 is also not looking very good. Losing, 600 theaters. Okay, so that's kind of outside the top 10. Is there anything, happy to talk about outside the top 10? I remember not having a lot of limited releases because it is this summer. Let me just check if I'm missing anything. Not really. There's nothing with a super high. Apollo 11's still doing okay. It's still out there from Neon. It's made about $9 million. Kind of a niche documentary there. The Dead Don't Die. We talked about that one a few times. That's only made $6 million. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking with that movie either. That one looked fascinating, but at the same time, I was like, I know it's not going to be great. Pavarotti's doing okay. Starting to slowly expand. Per theater average, people talk about this online, oh, it's doing well. The per theater average is $1,800 in 300 theaters. That's not well. That's okay. It's made $1.8 million so far. I don't see it really making $10 million or anything like that. Okay, so that's what's been happening. Here's the box. I mean, one of the big takeaways, we have a lot of flops this summer. We've walked through them all. Annabelle Comes Home's doing okay. Toy Story 4, despite its disappointment towards expectations, still a big win. Yesterday's, I think, a huge win for Universal. It's going to play very well for the next few weeks. Let's talk about what's coming out here for the July 4th holiday. On Tuesday, so a couple days away, we got Spider-Man Far From Home, which apparently is killing it in China, Japan, and Hong Kong. Just crushing it over there because it's already out. So I expect this one to be pretty massive. What are we looking at for holidays are so hard to predict because of the days. It's 3 days, 5 days, 6 days. I'm a 3-day sort of predictor here. That's all the scale and numbers that I know for the box office stuff. So I have no idea. $200 million by the end of the weekend, I would guess, ish, somewhere around there, probably higher. I don't know. But it's gonna be massive. It's gonna be a huge win. Apparently the quality is really good from what I've heard. So I think that's gonna be a big summer tentpole winner here, not another flop like we've been seeing. The one that really fascinates me is Midsummer, which comes out on Wednesday. So this is Ari Aster. We talked about Hereditary. This is his follow-up. It's got a lot of hype behind it. A lot of early screenings, press screenings to hype people up on social media. Film Twitter folks, they're all talking about it, clamoring to see this thing. What is it going to do? In terms of numbers wise, I would expect it to make around at least what Hereditary did, which was 40-ish. Domestic, I think it goes pretty higher than that. I think it goes 50, 60. And for an art horror film, that's fantastic. I do think we're going to have a similar effect that we saw with Hereditary. People went out to go see it. Okay, and this is why I break up those audience scores. You have the critics, you have the general audience, and then you have the film snobs and film Twitter and A24 fanboys, the people like me. So the critics are probably going to like it a lot and give it an 80 to 90% Rotten Tomato score. I think film Twitter is going to gush over it, and the Letterboxd score is going to be an 80, which is basically 100. I think general audiences are going to be what the fuck did I just watch? So we're going to see verified audience scores super low in the 70s, 60s. We're going to see cinema score C. I'm calling an F. It's a possibility, like a mother score. And I just think the all audience score, I think the post track is going to be all down. But despite that, I think that because of that juxtaposition and jarring sort of difference, I think it's going to make more money because of it. It's really going to pop off. I just think there's so much buzz. And to some degree, there is this vanguard group of people, like these film nerds, who then, you know, they talk about it constantly on social media, and that spreads out to the general audience. Like, oh, this is supposed to be really good because I heard like 10 other people talk about it. That's what's going to happen with Midsummer. Its legs are probably going to get cut off because of like the really low cinema score. Now, it may get a good cinema score. I may just be making bullshit up, but like, based on my experience, if it is kind of an out there horror film, people are going to show up thinking it's going to be, you know, Scream 6, and it ends up being, you know, Cannibal Holocaust. You know, it's just like, that's essentially what A24 does. That's like their business model when they market. Think of It Comes at Night. People thought that was like a zombie movie. It ends up being this like really amazing post-apocalyptic, like just like a thriller about family and I love that movie. But that was the same thing with The Witch. They mismarketed on purpose to sort of get people in the door, and then they get like really pissed off about it. But even pissed off people talk about it, and that increases your press online. So I think it's a strategy that A24 just does. Like, let's just get people out there and get them upset, and then that'll increase our audience. So Midsummer, I think it's going to do really well. I think it's going to have that weird sort of low cinema score, low general audience score, but it's going to have this effect among critics and sort of film nerds that's going to keep it sort of propelling forward. And we're going to be talking about Midsummer probably for years, I bet. The weekend after that is really interesting too. We have Crawl, which I think is going to do great. Crawl's like an alligator horror film. It looks super schlocky, a lot of fun. I'm in on that. And I think a lot of people are too. That's like a general audience winner. It's like, oh yeah, it's a crocodile. There's a hurricane. This is going to be awesome. Stuber also comes out from Fox. I don't know much about that one. It looks okay. I don't think it's going to do very well though, unless I'm missing a whole audience segment. Then we're into Lion King on the 19th, which is going to be what? I don't know. Lion King, $200 million opening. It's got to be, right? I mean, it's like everybody's been clamoring for this movie for like a year, 2 years to see it. So I don't know. I think at least $200 million opening. It's going to be massive. Top 5 opening all time, maybe. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood comes on the 26th. I don't think it's going to do all that well. It's a new Tarantino movie. You got Brad Pitt, you got Leonardo DiCaprio, you got Margot Robbie. 3 huge movie stars right now. I just don't see it. I don't see it doing all that well just because there's a lot of weird press around it. There was that piece on Quentin Tarantino and Uma Thurman in Variety where he comes off across as like this complete asshole and kind of serving a sexist. And then they had that interview at Cannes Film Festival where he didn't come off so hot. I just don't think, and again, I'm thinking, you think about those audience groups, right? The critics, is critics really an audience group? Probably not, but like they sort of drive demand for films sometimes. I think critics are going to like it. I think the letterboxed film nerds are going to like it because we're all sort of Tarantino fanboys at the end of the day. The real question and what drives all of the money and financial and box office stuff for the most part is that general audience. Are they going to show up for this? My answer is no. Why would they show up for this? A period piece about like what, late 60s Hollywood? Why the fuck would they care about that? And it's got Tarantino's name on it. It's got big movie stars, but like we know we're in a different era now where movie stars can't carry stuff. And I say that in the week after, I think the week after Hobbs and Shaw might be carried by a movie star. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in Fast and the Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw. He's going to be massive. It's kind of like, that's kind of maybe the last hurrah of summer, really. We're already getting there. The first weekend in August is kind of it. Maybe you can stretch it the second weekend in August, but then after that, school starts going again, and people going off to college, and things really quiet down the box office. So we don't have a ton left. We got Spider-Man, Lion King, I think Hobbs and Shaw. The rest are going to be sort of mid-tier, smaller films. And then we get into August, and that's essentially, we do have scary stories to tell in the dark on the 9th. There's a lot of stuff coming on the 9th. You have Dora the Explorer on the 9th. The Kitchen, I don't know what that is. I should know what that is probably on the 9th of August. We're talking now. I just don't think they're going to do, it's not going to pop off. Then by the time we get the 16th, it gets really quieter. There's a lot of stuff coming out, but I just don't think any of it's going to do very well. I'm really interested to see what 47 Meters Down does on the 16th of August. I kind of really want to see that in theaters. And who doesn't love a good shark movie in August? And then it's basically the end of summer. So yeah, it's been a really weird summer. A lot of flops. I think the big stuff is obviously Spider-Man and Lion King going to be the focus of the show for the next probably month or so, and kind of guess where they end up and what they're going to do. And I'll probably spend a lot of time at Midsummer because I'm just really fascinated by that movie and see how I think it's going to have a really interesting dichotomy going on. So we'll cover that a lot next weekend. Anyways, and I'll probably have Chris on next week too. I'll do a little segment for you and join the show, and so you get to hear another voice. It'll be awesome. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildlion Podcast.